Maya. Maya, dear God. What are you doing out here? The words tore out of Richard Langston's chest as he staggered forward. A woman in a navy blue uniform lay curled on a snow-covered bench near the edge of Central Park, barely more than a shadow under the white. Her arms were tucked close to her chest, her breath so shallow it barely stirred the frost clinging to her lips. Maya, he said again, lower now, shaken. Maya, wake up. She didn't move. Richard dropped to one knee, ignoring the wet seeping through the fabric of his trousers. He reached out and touched her shoulder. The chill of her skin jolted him like an electric shock. She was breathing barely. Her lips were pale, her eyelashes stiff with frost. No, 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 he muttered, fumbling for his phone. His fingers trembled as he dialed. 911, Central Park, near East 64th. There's a woman, she's unconscious. She's freezing, please. It's a Derry. As he waited for the sirens, his eyes stayed fixed on her face. The face he had seen every morning for 3 years without ever truly seeing. Maya Thompson, his housekeeper, the woman who brewed his coffee at dawn, who folded his shirts with quiet precision, who slipped through his house like a shadow that cleaned and polished and disappeared. He had fired her. The memory surged up uninvited, sharp and ugly. It had been 1 week earlier, a morning just as cold. Richard had been pacing the marble-floored kitchen, checking his watch, irritation tightening his jaw. He had a meeting downtown, investors flying in from Chicago. A deal that couldn't afford delays. Breakfast was supposed to be ready at 6 sharp. Eggs, toast, black coffee. 6:07. Maya, he barked, his voice echoing through the house. She rushed in moments later. Breathless, her scarf half undone, her hands shaking. I'm sorry, sir, she said, already moving toward the stove. You're late, he snapped, and nothing is ready. I know. I'm so sorry, she said, her voice unsteady. There was an older woman on the corner. She fell. She couldn't get up. I stayed until someone came. I don't pay you to play hero, Richard cut in coldly. I pay you to do your job. She flinched. Please, sir, I can explain. She was bleeding. I couldn't just leave her there. You could, he said, his temper flaring. And you should have, Wither decided. He gestured to the empty counter. Look at this. I'm already behind schedule. Do you have any idea what this meeting costs if I'm late? I'll make it right now, Maya pleaded, tears welling in her eyes. Please, just give me 5 minutes. 5 minutes. The same words she would repeat later in her mind. Over and over, instead of answering. Richard stepped closer, his face hard. You think the world runs on excuses? He shoved past her toward the counter. In the chaos of the moment, his arm swung back sharply. His hand struck her across the cheek. The sound was dull and shocking. Maya stumbled, catching herself against the counter. Her hand flew to her face. A thin line of blood appeared at the corner of her mouth. She stared at him, stunned, more hurt by the disbelief than the pain. I'm sorry, she whispered, her knees trembling. Please don't do this. I need this job. I have no one. I'll never be late again. Please. Her voice broke. She sank down, clutching the edge of the counter, begging now, the words tumbling out desperate and raw. Richard didn't listen. Rage and pride drowned out everything else. You're done here, he said flatly. Get your things and leave. She sobbed openly then. Sir, please. I have nowhere to go. I just tried to help someone. Please, out, he repeated. No severance, no apology, just the slam of a door and the echo of her quiet, broken crying fading down the hall. Now, kneeling beside her in the snow, that memory burned through him like acid. The sirens wailed closer. Richard brushed snow from Maya's sleeve with a shaking hand. Her uniform was thin, too thin for winter. He noticed her shoes' cracked soles, soaked through. How long had she been out here? He thought of his house, the warm guest room, the unused basement, the fireplace she always lit before he came downstairs. She had been sleeping somewhere else. He understood that now with sickening clarity. Paramedics rushed in, voices sharp and efficient. Severe hypothermia, one said. We need to move her now. I'm coming, Richard said automatically, following as they lifted her onto the stretcher. At the hospital, the world narrowed to white walls and harsh light. He sat rigid in a chair outside the emergency room, his expensive coat still damp with melting snow. He ignored his phone buzzing in his pocket. Nothing felt important. Nothing except the woman fighting for her life behind those doors. When they finally let him in, Maya lay wrapped in warming blankets, an oxygen mask covering her mouth. Tubes ran from her arms. She looked impossibly small. He sat beside her bed, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles ached. Hours later, her eyelids fluttered. Am I dead? She whispered. No, Richard said hoarsely. You're alive. You're safe. She turned her head toward him, recognition slowly dawning. Fear crossed her face. Why are you here? Because I failed you, he said, and I don't know how to live with that. Tears slid silently down her temples. She turned away. I didn't steal. I didn't lie. I was never late. I just helped someone. I know, he said, his voice barely audible. And I punished you for it. She didn't answer. Richard stayed, staring at the steady rise and fall of her chest, the sound of the monitor marking time he had nearly taken from her. Outside, the snow kept falling, quiet and relentless, covering the city in white, unable to erase what had already been done, but bearing witness to the moment everything changed. If you feel Maya's pain, tap like and comment where you're watching from. Someone near you might be sharing this moment right now. The hospital room was quiet except for the soft, mechanical rhythm of the monitors. Richard sat in the corner, stiff in a chair too small for his frame, elbows on his knees, face buried in his hands. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly, the kind of sterile hum that made everything feel unreal. He hadn't moved in hours. Outside, the snowstorm had softened into a quiet, steady fall, muffling the sounds of the city like a blanket pulled over the world. He glanced at his phone. 15 missed calls, messages from his assistant, one from his daughter. Are you okay? Why aren't you answering? He turned the phone face down. For the first time in decades, business could wait. Maya lay in the bed, still unconscious. Her skin looked slightly warmer now, her cheeks flushed with a hint of life. She breathed through the oxygen mask, steady but shallow. A nurse came in briefly to check the IV and nodded at Richard. We're doing everything we can. She's lucky you found her when you did. He gave a numb nod. Lucky. The word stuck in his throat. Nothing about this felt like luck. Richard rose and walked toward the small window. The city below was a blurred canvas of lights and drifting snow. He could see the edge of the park from here. Somewhere down there was the bench where Maya had almost died. Because of him, his reflection stared back at him in the window. Tailored suit, crisp white shirt, shoulders square and powerful, but his face was pale, drawn, his eyes rimmed with sleepless regret. He looked like a man who'd seen a ghost. Maybe he had. He turned and looked back at her. Maya had always been precise, efficient, nearly invisible in his world of clean lines and controlled schedules. She had worked through holidays, during storms, through personal pain he had never bothered to ask about, and when she was 7 minutes late after saving a stranger, he'd treated her like a malfunctioning appliance, dispensable, replaceable. And now? He wasn't sure how to begin undoing what he had done. The door creaked open. A young doctor in blue scrubs stepped in, glancing at the clipboard in her hands. Her core temperature is coming back up, she said softly. If she continues to stabilize, we may try to bring her fully conscious by morning. Richard stood, eager for direction. And after that, she'll need rest, warmth, observation for a few days. Do you have a plan for her discharge, family, insurance? I'll cover it, he said quickly. Everything. Whatever she needs. The doctor raised an eyebrow. Are you a relative? Richard hesitated. I'm her former employer. The word stung. Former. It sounded cold, distant, incomplete. The doctor nodded once, then left the room. Richard sat down again and leaned forward, his eyes never leaving Maya. You shouldn't have to be saved by someone who broke you, he whispered, but I will be here. For as long as it takes. He didn't sleep that night. When dawn broke, the windows glowed pale orange, and a quiet knock came at the door. A nurse entered with a tray, coffee, and toast. She looked surprised to see him still there. You've been here all night? He nodded. I'm not going anywhere. She gave him a long, unreadable look, then set the tray down and left. Around mid-morning, Maya stirred. Her fingers twitched. Her eyelids fluttered. Richard moved to the side of the bed, heart pounding. Maya? He said gently. She blinked up at him, confused at first. Her lips moved beneath the mask, dry and cracked. He reached for the small button to alert the nurse, then hesitated. Don't try to speak, he said. You're safe. You're at the hospital. You're going to be okay. Her eyes, still heavy with exhaustion, settled on his face. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just looked at him as if trying to decide whether this was a dream or a cruel twist of fate. He couldn't blame her. I stayed, he added quietly, because I couldn't bear not to. I know I don't deserve your trust, but I'm not going to leave you again. Tears welled slowly in her eyes. She turned her face away from him and whispered something he barely heard. Why? Richard sat back down. Because I should have cared before. Because I didn't ask. I didn't listen, and it almost killed you. The nurse entered a moment later, saw Maya awake, and quickly began checking her vitals. Maya didn't speak again. Not to Richard, not even to the nurse. She simply stared at the ceiling, her face blank. Later that afternoon, when Maya drifted back to sleep, Richard finally stepped out to call his assistant. Tell the board I won't be at the meeting, he said. Sir, they've been waiting since this morning. Tell them to proceed without me. A pause, then a quiet, yes, Mr. Langston. He hung up and walked down the hall to the nurse's station. I want her to have a private room, he said, and a dedicated nurse. That will be expensive, the nurse replied. I didn't ask the price. By evening, Maya was moved to a quieter wing. Richard stood at the foot of the bed as the nurses adjusted her monitors and covered her with another blanket. She'll need someone when she wakes up again, the nurse said, softer now. Someone who knows what she's been through. Richard nodded slowly. Then I'll be that someone. No matter how long it takes. The nurse looked at him, eyes searching. You care about her? He hesitated, then said the truest thing he'd said in years. I should have. Maya awoke to warmth she didn't recognize. Not the prickling, stinging heat of recovering circulation, but something gentler, ambient, steady. She blinked against the filtered sunlight spilling in through cream-colored curtains. The bed beneath her was soft. Too soft. The blankets tucked around her felt like clouds. For a brief, disoriented moment, she thought maybe she had died after all, and ended up somewhere kind. Then the door opened, and she saw him. Richard Langston. He stepped in quietly, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. His ever-perfect hair was slightly out of place, and the expensive navy suit he wore seemed somehow muted in the hospital light. But his eyes, the eyes of the man who once fired her without a word of thanks, looked different. They were tired. Softer. Human. You're awake, he said, as though confirming something sacred. Maya instinctively pulled the blanket up to her chin. Her voice rasped. Where am I? Lenox Hill Hospital, he answered, placing 1 coffee on the side table. You were brought in 2 nights ago. You passed out in the park. Hypothermia. Her throat ached. How long? Almost 2 full days. He paused. You've been stable since yesterday morning. The doctors say you're improving. She stared at him, wary. Why are you here? Richard took a breath and lowered himself into the chair beside her bed. Because I was the reason you ended up out there. Maya's fingers tightened around the edge of the blanket. You didn't have to be. I know. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The distant beep of machines and the low murmur of voices outside filled the silence. Richard looked down at the coffee in his hands as though he needed something to hold on to. I hit you, he said finally. I've replayed that moment in my mind every hour since. I don't remember what I was thinking, only how furious I was. About breakfast. He let out a bitter laugh. Eggs and toast. That's what I thought mattered. Maya didn't move. Her face remained unreadable, but her eyes glistened slightly at the edges. I was late because of a woman, she whispered. An old lady. She slipped at the crosswalk. I waited with her until help came. He nodded. You told me. I didn't listen. No, she said, turning to look at him fully. You didn't care. Richard closed his eyes for a second. You're right. I didn't. The words settled in the air between them, raw and unvarnished. Maya looked away. You didn't have to fire me. You didn't have to strike me. No. I didn't. His voice dropped. There's no excuse, but I'm not here to make one. I'm here to say, I'm sorry. For everything. Sorry doesn't pay rent, she murmured. Richard nodded slowly. No, it doesn't. That's why I've taken care of your hospital bill. I've already spoken to the administrator. You'll have a private recovery room and access to whatever you need. And when you're discharged, I'd like to help further. If you'll let me. Maya frowned. Help how? Not charity, he said quickly. A correction. A beginning. I've arranged for you to stay in the guest wing of my home just while you recover. No obligations. No work. Just rest. Food. Warmth. Safety. She stared at him, long and hard, searching for the angle. Why would I ever go back to that house? She asked, her voice low and firm. You think I can forget what happened there? No, Richard admitted, and I wouldn't ask you to, but I hope I can show you something different now, not as your employer, just as a man trying to make things right. And Maya looked away again. The ceiling seemed very far away. I don't want pity, she said. This isn't pity, he replied. It's accountability. She didn't respond, and for a moment, he thought she might ask him to leave. But instead, she said, What about my things? I left them in the laundry closet. Richard's stomach turned. You were living there? For months. He stood slowly. Then the first thing I'll do is have them packed properly, and sanitized, and delivered, or brought wherever you choose. Maya closed her eyes. I'll think about it. Of course, he said, his voice soft. Take all the time you need. He made his way to the door, then paused. Do you want me to stay? She hesitated, then almost imperceptibly nodded. So he stayed. Quietly. At first. Just sitting. Breathing the same air. Sharing the same moment of tentative peace. Later, when she dozed again, he stepped out and made calls. Arrangements. Plans. He canceled his meetings for the week. He called in favors. He called his daughter and left a voicemail saying, simply, I need to tell you something important. Not business. Real life. The next day, when Maya was stronger, the doctors approved her move to a more private room. Richard helped coordinate it personally. No press. No noise. As the orderly wheeled her down the hallway, Maya glanced at him from the bed. You're not who I thought you were, she said softly. I'm not who I thought I was either, Richard replied. They said nothing else. But in that quiet, something shifted. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But the beginning of something new, like snow melting under the first touch of spring. Maya left the hospital 3 days later. The snow had stopped sometime during the night, leaving the city washed clean and deceptively calm. Richard stood at the curb outside the hospital entrance, the collar of his coat turned up against the cold, watching as an orderly carefully wheeled Maya toward the black town car waiting by the door. She was wrapped in a thick wool coat now, charcoal gray. New. Her hair was neatly braided, though her face was still pale, her movements measured. She looked smaller than she had in his house, smaller than she had on that bench. You don't have to do this, she said quietly, as the orderly stopped. I could go to a shelter. Richard shook his head once. You could, but you won't. She studied him, searching for the familiar sharpness, the authority that once made her flinch. It wasn't there. What stood in its place unsettled her, more steadiness, restraint, something deliberate. This is temporary, she said. Of course, he replied. On your terms. The drive to the estate was silent. The city passed by in slow motion, bundled pedestrians, corner coffee carts steaming in the cold, children hopping over slush puddles left behind by plows. Maya watched it all from the back seat, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She hadn't been inside a private car in years, not since she'd moved north chasing work that never quite paid enough. Richard watched her reflection in the window. She looked older than her years, not broken but worn in a way that came from carrying too much for too long. When they arrived, the gates opened smoothly, the familiar iron curves framing the long driveway. Maya's chest tightened despite herself. This was the place she had scrubbed and polished, the place where her voice had always stayed low, her presence small. The car stopped near the side entrance, not the front. "I thought," she began. "I didn't think the front steps were appropriate," Richard said gently. "Not right now." That mattered more than she expected. Inside, the house was quiet. No staff, no echo of footsteps or clatter of dishes. The air smelled faintly of lemon oil and wood smoke. Maya realized with a dull ache that this was the first time she had entered this house without being on duty. Richard led her down a corridor she rarely used, past a set of closed doors, to the guest wing at the rear of the house. "This is yours," he said, opening the door. Sunlight flooded the room. A wide window overlooked the garden, now blanketed in snow. The bed was neatly made, layered with thick quilts. A small table held a vase with fresh tulips, yellow and white. Maya froze. "You remembered," she said softly. Richard nodded. "You smiled at them once, in the kitchen." She swallowed hard. "I'll have someone bring food up later," he continued. "Simple things. Soup, tea. If you want anything else, you tell me. Or don't. There's no schedule." "No chores?" she asked. "No expectations," he replied. She turned slowly, taking it in the warmth, the quiet, the absence of demand. It felt unreal, like stepping into someone else's life. "I'll leave you to rest," Richard said, "but I'll be nearby." She hesitated, then spoke before she could stop herself. "Why is everyone gone?" "I gave them the week off," he said. "I needed the house to be honest." She nodded, not sure what that meant, but feeling the weight of it nonetheless. After he left, Maya sat on the edge of the bed. Her body ached, but it was a dull ache now. Manageable. She touched the blanket, the smooth wood of the table, the cool glass of the window. Safe things, solid things. She lay back and closed her eyes. Sleep came quickly. Later that evening, there was a knock. Richard entered carrying a tray, chicken soup, warm bread, a mug of chamomile tea. He set it down without a word. "Thank you," she said. They ate in silence. Not uncomfortable, just careful. When she finished, she spoke again. "I never wanted to be invisible." Richard looked up. "I know. I just wanted to work, send money home, keep my family alive." Her voice trembled slightly. "I thought if I stayed quiet enough, nothing bad would happen." He leaned back in his chair. "I built my entire life on people staying quiet." That surprised her. "My father used to say," he continued, "order keeps chaos away." I believed him. I demanded order, precision, silence. I thought it made me strong. "And?" she asked. "And I confused control with integrity," he said. "And power with worth." She considered that. "Where I come from, silence isn't strength, it's survival." He nodded slowly. "I see that now." Later, after she rested again, Richard made a call from his study. Then another, and another. By midnight, arrangements were already underway: medical follow-ups, legal consultations, housing options. Not just for Maya, but for the systems he'd never questioned. The next morning, Maya found a small box at the foot of her bed. Inside were her belongings cleaned, neatly folded. Her worn sweater, a framed photo of her mother and younger brother, and at the bottom, her old name badge. She stared at it for a long time. Richard stood at the doorway. "I didn't know whether to include that." She picked it up, running her thumb over the scratched plastic. "I kept it," she said quietly, "because I thought if I worked hard enough, it would mean something." "Does it still?" he asked. She placed it back in the box. "Not the way it used to." That afternoon, she stepped outside into the garden for the first time. The snow crunched beneath her boots. The air was cold but clean. She breathed deeply. Richard watched her from the window. For the first time in years, the house didn't feel like a fortress. It felt like a place where something could be rebuilt. The next morning, Richard rose earlier than usual. Not to check emails, not to review the market, not to fine-tune a presentation. He woke because something inside him refused to rest. A weight had shifted, and he couldn't quite explain it. For the first time in years, the thought of profit margins didn't feel urgent. But the silence of the house, this new silence, filled not with polished order but with humility, did. He dressed quietly in a wool sweater and slacks instead of a suit. No tie, no polished shoes. As he made his way down the long corridor toward the guest wing, he paused briefly outside Maya's door. He didn't knock. He just stood there, listening. Then he turned and walked to the kitchen. He made the coffee himself. The machine hissed in protest at first, probably from lack of regular use. He poured 2 cups and stood there, hands warming around the mug, thinking about how often Maya had done exactly this, long before he opened his eyes each morning. He had never even said good morning. A knock on the side of the kitchen wall pulled him from his thoughts. Maya stood at the threshold, hair tied back, wrapped in a thick blue cardigan. She looked rested, but cautious. "I didn't mean to interrupt," she said softly. "You didn't," he replied, gesturing to the other mug. "Coffee?" She hesitated, then walked in. "Smells like you used too much roast." "I did." A small, reluctant smile crossed her lips. Not much, but it was something. They sat at the small kitchen table, one rarely used by Richard. It had a view of the backyard, where the snow now glistened under a pale morning sun. "It feels strange," Maya said. "Sitting here," he nodded. "It should." She took a sip, winced. "Still bitter," he chuckled. "Consistency was always your strength." Maya glanced out the window. "I haven't heard from my family since before the snow. My phone died. I don't have their numbers memorized anymore. They must be worried sick." "Is Z live?" Richard stood immediately. "Give me the names. We'll find them." "You don't have to." "I want to." Maya hesitated, then said, "My mom's name is Gloria. My younger brother's Caleb. They're in Atlanta. I send money every 2 weeks, but I haven't been able to call." Richard was already pulling out his phone. "I have someone who can help. Just give me as much detail as you remember." Within the hour, he had his personal security consultant begin making quiet calls. Not flashy, not invasive, just deliberate, respectful inquiry. Later that afternoon, as Maya rested, Richard returned to his study, a room that had always been a sanctuary of control. Floor-to-ceiling shelves, a polished walnut desk, a photo of him with former governors and CEOs. He looked at those photos now with a different kind of discomfort. They all had smiles, power smiles, success smiles, but none of them looked like Maya. He sat down, opened a blank notebook, and began to write something he hadn't done by hand in decades. "I had no idea where she slept. I didn't care what she feared. I never asked what she needed. I just expected her to stay invisible, and she almost died for it." He stared at the words, then underlined the last sentence twice. That evening, Maya stepped into the study for the first time. Richard had left the door open on purpose. "I never saw this room before," she said, arms folded. "It was always off limits." "It still feels like it is," Richard replied. "To me." She looked around. "It's not what I expected." "You don't have pictures of your family?" "No," he admitted. "Just awards. Proof I existed." Maya walked toward the window. The lights of the garden glowed faintly beyond the frost. "You can't erase what happened," she said, her voice quiet. "I'm not trying to," he answered, "but I am trying to understand the man who let it happen." She turned to face him. "Then don't look in here. Look at your people. Ask them what they need." He nodded slowly. "Would you help me do that?" Maya blinked. "What?" "If I created a position director of employee welfare, would you take it? You'd have authority. Not to clean the floor, but to fix the foundation." Maya let out a short breath. "You fire me and hit me 1 week, and the next you're offering me a job with authority?" "I'm not offering it to make amends," he said gently. I'm offering it because no one else knows how the bottom feels like you do. She didn't answer. Not yet. That night, Maya returned to her room and sat by the window. She watched the snow begin to fall again, soft and relentless. But this time, it wasn't cruel. It was just weather. She picked up the photo of her mother and Caleb, touched the edge of the frame. Tomorrow, she would call them. Tomorrow, she might say yes. But tonight, for the first time in a very long time, she was simply allowed to be. No chores, no orders, no fear, just Maya. The next morning, Maya stood in the hallway outside the kitchen, cradling the cordless phone to her ear with both hands. Her breath caught as she heard the ringtone on the other end. Please pick up. It clicked, and a voice filled the line, thin, trembling, familiar. Maya? Baby, is that you? Mama! Her voice broke like glass. It's me. I'm here. Oh, thank God. Gloria Thompson sounded like she hadn't slept in days. Caleb and we didn't know what happened. You just vanished. I called the number on your pay stub, but they said you didn't work there anymore. I know. I'm okay now. I promise. There was a silence, full and aching. I thought you were dead, Gloria whispered. Maya pressed her palm against the wall to stay upright. No, Mama. I'm alive. I'm safe. I'll explain everything, but I need you to trust me. Things are different now. I was not. I'm just glad you're breathing, her mother said. Where are you? I'm staying somewhere warm. Not working. Just healing. And there's a doctor checking on me. Every day. And the man you worked for, he didn't hurt you worse? Maya paused. He did. But he's trying to fix it. In a way I didn't think a man like him could. People don't change easy, her mother murmured. I know, Maya said. But something broke in him too. And maybe that's where change starts. To want to. After hanging up, Maya sat for a long time in the sunroom. The light came in through tall glass panes, warming the tile floor, casting soft shadows that swayed with the bare tree branches outside. She had always loved morning light. It reminded her of childhood Saturdays, her mother humming gospel while frying bacon, Caleb racing his toy truck across the porch. Richard joined her with 2 mugs, coffee for him, herbal tea for her. He didn't speak right away. Just sat beside her, letting the silence settle comfortably between them. You reached them? He asked. I did, she replied. They're okay. Worried sick. But okay. He nodded. I'm glad. She glanced sideways at him. You had someone find them, didn't you? Yes, quietly. I didn't want to cross a line, but I thought if you needed them. I did, she said. So thank you. He looked down into his mug. It doesn't feel like enough. It's a start, she said. Later that day, Richard convened a small meeting in the drawing room, with the remaining household staff, 3 people who had been with him for over a decade. Angela, the head cook, Martin, the groundskeeper, and Patricia, the driver's assistant. Maya stood at the doorway, uncertain whether she belonged. Richard motioned for her to join. I want to speak plainly, he began. Last week, I made a decision that nearly cost someone their life. Maya was late 7 minutes late because she helped a stranger in need, and I fired her. No one said a word. Angela's eyes filled. Martin looked at the floor. I didn't ask why. I didn't see her pain. I never bothered to learn anything about the woman who kept this house running. And that's not just a failure of character. It's a failure of leadership. He turned slightly, gesturing toward Maya. She's back not as a maid, but as Director of Staff Welfare, a new position, one with authority, one with a voice. Angela blinked. She deserves that. She does, Richard replied. Patricia looked at Maya and said, I'm glad you're still standing. After what Maya raised her hand. I'm not here to relive what happened. I'm here to make sure it never happens again. To anyone. There was a long, heavy silence. And then Martin stepped forward and extended his hand. Welcome back, he said. Maya shook it, surprised by how steady her hand felt. That evening, Richard found her in the guest wing, sitting at the desk reviewing a file. He hesitated in the doorway, watching her brow furrow with focus. It was the first time he'd seen her look powerful. You're settling in, he said. I've got a list, she replied. Staff rotation issues, No PTO tracking. No mental health resources. I can fix it, but I'll need support. You have it, he said. She looked at him for a long moment. Then, let's not waste time. He smiled. You've always had the best clock in this house. The next morning, she woke early and walked through the estate alone. It was different now, not cold marble, not polished surface. There was texture. There was memory. In the kitchen, she brewed 2 cups. She didn't wait to be asked. When Richard entered, she handed him one and said, "Still bitter." He laughed softly. Perfect. They stood there for a moment, shoulder to shoulder. Something had shifted. Not a reversal, not a redemption, but a redefinition. This time, Maya wasn't serving. She was leading. The Langston estate had always been an image of perfection, symmetrical hedges, imported tile, paintings chosen more for their price than their story. But over the next few weeks, as snow gave way to slush, and the first traces of spring stirred beneath the soil, something more important than seasons began to change. And the change had a name. Maya Thompson. She had moved into her new role with quiet precision. Not dramatic, not performative, no press releases, no announcements, just action. Every morning, she arrived at the staff wing at 7 sharp earlier than any of them. Except Martin, who was always trimming hedges in the dark. She brought with her not just forms and schedules, but questions no one had ever asked. When was your last day off? Do you feel safe speaking up about concerns? What do you need in order to do your job better? Some didn't know how to answer at first. Others wept. Richard watched from a distance, unsure whether to be proud or ashamed. Maya was doing what he had never done, building trust without demanding silence, listening without controlling, and slowly, the house began to feel alive, not just efficient. On a gray Wednesday, Maya found herself sitting in the former laundry room, the same cramped, concrete space where she used to sleep between mops and detergent. She had asked for the key. No one questioned why. She sat on the old wooden crate she once used as a pillow and stared at the corner where a folded blanket still remained. Angela had kept it. She picked up the blanket, pressed it to her face, then folded it carefully and placed it in a box labeled "Keep." When she exited the room, Richard was waiting at the end of the hall. He didn't speak, just looked at her, quietly. "I want to turn that room into something new," she said. He nodded. "What do you have in mind?" "A break space, for staff. Somewhere safe, comfortable, with a couch, not a crate." "It's yours," he said simply. The next day, she made a call to a woman she knew from church in the Bronx, an interior designer who had never stepped foot in a mansion. "I need warm colors," Maya said. "Things that say, 'We see you.'" By Friday, the walls were painted a soft amber. A second-hand leather couch was delivered. A bookshelf. A rug with a slightly frayed edge, but full of color. Maya brought in a coffee maker and a vintage record player. Music played there now. Old Sam Cooke, a little Aretha. Staff began dropping by between shifts. It wasn't fancy, but it felt human. That weekend, Richard invited Maya to the sunroom. "I've been asked to host a charity gala next month," he said. "It's annual. Usual crowd. Politics, finance, a lot of suits and champagne." She raised an eyebrow. "And you want me there?" "I want you on stage." Maya blinked. "Excuse me?" "I want you to speak. About the work you're doing. About the staff program. About what it took to get here." She set her teacup down slowly. "That's not a stage I belong on." "Neither did I," Richard said, "until someone showed me what mattered." Maya stood and walked toward the window, arms crossed. "I'm not your redemption arc," she said. "I know," he replied. "You're your own story." She was quiet for a long time. Then she turned and said, "If I speak, it's not for them. It's for every invisible woman working in a house like this." He nodded. "That's exactly why it has to be you." Later that evening, Maya took out her old notebook, the one she used to write grocery lists and overtime hours, and opened it to a fresh page. At the top, she wrote in clean, sharp letters, "No one slips through the cracks again." She closed the book and turned off the light. Outside, the wind had softened. A cardinal landed on the edge of the window, bright red against the gray. Maya watched it for a moment before it flew away. In the quiet, she allowed herself a small truth she hadn't dared believe before. She was not a maid anymore. She was something more. The ballroom hadn't changed in years. Crystal chandeliers sparkled from the vaulted ceiling. Polished marble floors reflected every glint of light, and the walls still bore the same muted gold wallpaper chosen by a designer who'd charged more for taste than heart. But tonight, the space felt different. The charity gala was one of Richard Langston's signature annual events, an evening where wealth congregated in tuxedos and designer gowns, exchanging promises over flute glasses and shrimp skewers. The air always smelled of perfume and performance. This year, however, the invitation list had been edited. Maya stood at the far end of the room, near the grand piano that hadn't been played in decades. Her dress was navy blue, simple, long-sleeved, modest. Her hair was braided back neatly, and she wore no jewelry except for a silver locket that had belonged to her grandmother. She had nearly refused to come. "I don't belong here," she had said earlier that week. Richard's answer had been soft but firm. "You belong here more than most." Now, she stood quietly, as guests began to arrive, politicians, philanthropists, business magnates. Some nodded politely at her, assuming she was part of the event staff. Others ignored her entirely. Angela approached from the side, dressed in her best black cocktail dress. "You okay?" "I'm breathing," Maya replied. Angela smiled and handed her a small linen napkin. "You're gonna need this when they start clapping." Maya shook her head. "You think they'll even look at me?" "Oh, they'll look, because Richard Langston's giving up the mic to someone they never expected." A bell chimed. The room settled. Richard stood at the center, microphone in hand. He looked as polished as ever. Charcoal suit, pale blue tie, pocket square folded with military precision, but there was something new in his posture. Humility, stillness, a man who had stared at something broken and chosen not to turn away. "Good evening," he began. "Thank you all for coming. Tonight, you'll see faces you've seen before. Donors, partners, friends. But you'll also meet someone new. Someone who changed this house more than any remodel, more than any investment ever could." He glanced toward Maya. "When I first met her, I didn't really see her. And because of that blindness, I made a mistake that nearly cost a life. Tonight, she will speak for herself, for those we too often overlook." He stepped back. Maya hesitated. Then she walked toward the stage. The silence was immediate. Not disrespectful, just waiting. She reached the microphone. Her heart pounded, but her hands didn't shake. "My name is Maya Thompson," she began. "For 3 years, I worked in this house as a maid. I cleaned your fingerprints off wine glasses. I picked lint from imported rugs. I made sure you didn't see what you didn't want to see." A shift moved through the crowd. "I was good at being invisible, until the day I was 7 minutes late, because I helped a woman, an elderly stranger, who had fallen in the street." She paused. "For those 7 minutes, I was fired. Not asked, not questioned, just dismissed." Her eyes swept the crowd. "That same night, I slept on a bench in Central Park. I almost died of hypothermia. The man who fired me found me there the next morning. And he chose, for the first time, to see." A few gasps, some lowered heads. "I don't share this for pity. I share this because I am not the only one. There are thousands of Maya's women, men, people of color, immigrants working in silence, surviving behind luxury." Maya's voice strengthened. "Tonight, I stand here not as a maid. I stand here as Director of Staff Welfare for the Langston Group. And my job is simple: to ensure that no one working in our homes, our offices, or our buildings ever slips through the cracks again." Someone in the crowd began to clap, then another, then the room stood, slowly but with growing force. Maya stepped back, her eyes glistening, but her spine tall. Richard met her at the bottom of the stairs. "That was beyond words." She nodded. "Now we work." Whoa. After the gala, people approached her quietly, respectfully. A senator's wife offered her card. A CEO asked for her input on his corporate housing policies. But Maya wasn't dazzled. She knew the difference between applause and action. Later, back in her room, she sat on the bed and removed the silver locket. Inside was a photo of her grandmother, arms folded, standing outside a farmhouse in Alabama. "You'd be proud of me," Maya whispered. "I didn't disappear. Would Mai too?" And somewhere, in the stillness of that room, it felt like someone was listening. Monday morning arrived quietly. The snowfall had melted into crisp puddles, and the city breathed beneath the early light, like something waiting to begin again. Maya stood in the kitchen at precisely 6 a.m., her palm wrapped around a warm mug of black tea, the air around her filled with the scent of toast and roasted cinnamon. She wasn't working. She was watching. Angela hummed as she prepped the day's breakfast for the house staff, moving with the comfort of routine. Martin passed by the open archway, humming too, carrying hedge clippers and grumbling to himself about squirrels. Patricia leaned against the hallway wall outside, reading something on her phone while she waited to start the driving route. Maya took it all in, the rhythm, the small talk, the quiet dignity. 3 weeks ago, these same people would barely have met her eyes. Now they nodded when she passed. They stopped to ask about new schedules, speak about their kids, or share opinions on city bus delays. It was subtle, but it was real. Richard entered the room, unannounced and casual in a wool sweater and jeans, with sleeves rolled to the elbows. He poured himself a coffee without ceremony and took a seat across from her at the table. "How was your weekend?" he asked. Maya raised an eyebrow. "You were at the same gala, Richard." "True," he said, "but I only saw the part where you stole the room." Maya snorted softly. "It still feels strange being applauded for telling the truth." "Strange," Richard said, "is what happens when the right people finally listen." He reached into a leather folder and pulled out a thin packet of papers. "What's this?" she asked. "A pilot initiative," he replied. "For the staff across all Langston properties. Houses, rentals, corporate suites, quarterly wellness check-ins, anonymous feedback surveys, paid sick leave enforcement, on-site HR liaisons." She scanned the document. "This isn't a draft," she said. "This is ready to sign. It's yours to review first," he said. "Your department." Maya closed the folder gently. "I'll give you feedback tomorrow." He nodded. "Fair." A soft buzzing interrupted the moment. Richard checked his phone, frowned slightly, then looked up at her. "There's something else." Maya tilted her head. "More changes?" "Not yet, but maybe. A conversation worth having." He slid his phone across the table. The screen showed an email from the Times. Subject: Profile request. Maya Thompson. "They want to do a story," Richard said. "Long form. Print and digital." "You can say no." Maya stared at the screen. Her name looked surreal in that font, like it belonged to someone else. "I don't want to be a symbol," she said quietly. "I just wanted a job." "I know," Richard said, "but sometimes stories like yours, they change more than policies. They change people." Maya pushed the phone back toward him. "Only if they're told right." "I'll make sure of it," he said. "No," she corrected gently. "I'll make sure of it." That afternoon, Maya visited her new office, a renovated space above the garage that used to store estate ledgers. Now it had warm yellow walls, a round table instead of a desk, soft chairs, and a corkboard filled with handwritten notes from staff. "Thank you for asking if my back was okay. No one's ever asked me how I got here before. You made us feel real." She added a new note to the board. It read, "Respect is not a reward. It's a right." As she stepped back, her phone buzzed. "Caleb." She answered immediately. "Hey sis," he said, breathless. "You sitting down?" "I'm standing in front of a wall of sticky notes and emotional breakthroughs." "Close enough." "I got accepted," he said. "Georgia State, full scholarship. S." Maya's knees nearly buckled. "Oh my God." "I wanted to wait until I got the package in the mail, but I couldn't. I had to tell you." She covered her mouth with her hand. Her chest ached, but not in the way it used to. This was joy. Sharp and clean. "You earned this," she said. "All of it. We both did." After the call, Maya walked through the garden paths, remembering nights spent watching stars from the employee entrance, her coat wrapped tight and her back aching. She remembered whispered prayers in storage closets. She remembered hiding bruises behind makeup and the shame of being grateful for a place to sleep on a pile of rags, but none of that defined her now. As she passed the small fountain near the edge of the garden, she paused. Snow still clung to the edges of the stone. She leaned down, reached into her coat pocket, and pulled out her old name badge, the one from her housekeeping days. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she placed it gently on the edge of the fountain and walked away. Let the snow take it. She no longer needed to carry that part of herself in her pocket. It had already built her into someone new. The next morning, Maya awoke to sunlight pooling across her bedroom floor like golden cloth. It was the kind of morning that invited stillness. But Maya had never been one to linger. She dressed in soft slacks and a slate-gray cardigan, wrapped a scarf around her neck, and headed downstairs with a notebook tucked under one arm. Down in the kitchen, the house hummed gently with motion. Angela was already singing along to a Sam Cooke tune playing on the radio, flipping pancakes with effortless grace. Patricia and Martin were laughing about something in the hallway. The staff sounded alive again, and that sound carried weight. "Smells good in here," Maya said, stepping in. Angela turned with a grin. "Your fault. I'm back to making breakfast like it's Sunday church brunch." Maya laughed. "I'll take some of that guilt on a plate." As they sat down with their plates, Maya opened her notebook. "I want to talk about the staff network expansion," she said. "If we're going to replicate what we've built here in the other Langston properties, we need a standardized model." Angela leaned forward. "You're saying every house should have what we have? I'm saying every person should feel seen and safe, no matter where they work. That starts with structure." They spent the next hour mapping out what they'd call the Langston Employee Dignity Program. There would be weekly check-ins, an anonymous hotline, emergency housing stipends for those in crisis, and every estate would have a staff liaison trained in both HR protocols and empathy. Empathy wasn't optional anymore. After breakfast, Maya stepped out for a walk through the upper garden. Snowdrops had started pushing through the patches of melting frost, stubborn and soft. Just like hope, she took the long path, circling past the old guest house, her next project. She wanted to convert it into temporary housing for employees in transition, those escaping violence or those new to the city. Richard found her there, standing on the steps with a clipboard in hand. "Planning another revolution?" he asked. "Maybe," she replied without looking up. "This place has sat empty for too long. I think we could do better." "I'm listening." "It could be a sanctuary," Maya said. "Not just a room with a lock. A place with warmth, privacy, dignity." He nodded. "You'd run it?" "I'd design it, but someone with lived experience would run it." Richard smiled. "You're thinking bigger than me now. You handed me the blueprint," she said. "I'm just drawing new lines." "Then Breet." He folded his arms, then asked, more gently, "And how are you doing, personally?" Maya turned toward him. "I'm learning how to live without apologizing for taking up space," she said. "That's new for me." Richard's gaze dropped, then lifted again. "You shouldn't have had to learn that here." "No," she said, "but I did. And that means something." They walked together in silence for a bit, the wind light and cool, brushing their coats like a hand reminding them spring was coming. That afternoon, Maya video called her mother. "Hey, Mama," she said, smiling. Gloria was sitting in her small kitchen, apron dusted with flour, something baking in the background. "There's my girl," she beamed. "You look happy." "I think I am," Maya replied. "Found your place?" "No, I made it." Her mother nodded slowly. "That's even better." That night, after the house was quiet, Maya sat in her room with her journal. She flipped to a blank page and wrote, "We are not our lowest moments. We are what we do after." She closed the book, set it down beside her bed, and turned off the light. She dreamed of a garden with no fences, of windows open to the wind, of laughter in places that used to echo with silence. The following week brought the kind of brisk spring mornings that woke the senses. Birds had returned, their songs fluttering through the garden hedges like small declarations of life. Sunlight pooled in generous sheets across the estate, warming window panes that had long forgotten what it meant to glow. Maya stepped out into the courtyard just past dawn, a to-go mug in hand, her cardigan buttoned high. She had always loved this hour before phones rang, before emails piled up, before anyone needed anything. It was the only time the world whispered instead of demanded. She stood at the edge of the reflecting pool, where the ice had fully melted. The surface was still, mirroring the sky, broken only by a single blossom that had fallen from the cherry tree overhead. Behind her, the heavy front door creaked open. Richard appeared, dressed in his usual fitted coat, but this time, no tie, no briefcase. Just him. Couldn't sleep? Maya asked without turning. Didn't want to, he replied. Too quiet in that house when no one's arguing over policy proposals. She smirked. You miss the chaos already? He came to stand beside her. It's a better kind of chaos. They looked down at the pool together. Funny, he said. This place used to feel like control. Now it just feels empty when you're not in it. Maya took a slow sip. That reflection down there, it doesn't lie. We can't smooth over the past, but we can decide who we want to be when the surface ripples. You've been talking to Angela again, haven't you? Richard smiled. She always did have a preacher's rhythm when she's on a roll. He chuckled, then paused. I've been thinking about the gala. The Times article? No, he said. The donations that came in after. Over $2 million in pledges, all earmarked for the Staff Welfare Initiative. Maya blinked. $2 million? Richard nodded. I want you to oversee the allocation, full discretion. She turned to him slowly. That's not a small ask. I know, but it's the right one. They walked back toward the house, the air around them crisp but gentle. A soft breeze carried the scent of budding grass and new beginnings. Later that morning, Maya entered her office, now fully hers. On the wall was a map of all Langston properties across the country. Red pins marked the current active staff centers. Yellow ones indicated regions in planning. There were more yellows than reds for now. She sat down at her desk, turned on her computer, and pulled up the first regional report from Florida, an estate in Palm Beach with 5 live-in staff. No formal grievance protocol, and a cook who had worked there for 12 years without a raise. Not anymore, she murmured. By noon, she had emailed the estate manager, organized a virtual town hall for the following week, and begun compiling a new national policy draft. She worked through lunch. When Patricia popped in and asked if she wanted a sandwich, Maya waved her in and shared half. Feels like you're running a government up here, Patricia joked. Some days, Maya replied. It feels like I am. Patricia lowered her voice. You know, some of the staff say they don't even dream about promotions anymore. They say you are the dream. Just having you where you are. Maya was quiet for a moment. Then I better not disappoint them. I don't. That evening, back in her room, Maya called Caleb. I saw your scholarship letter framed on Mom's wall, she said. You know she prays over it every morning? Maya laughed. She used to do that over my school shoes. She still does, he said. Even though you don't wear uniforms anymore. They talked about his classes, about the professor who made them write essays on Nina Simone lyrics, about how the cafeteria chili still tasted like cardboard. When she hung up, she lay back on her bed, eyes on the ceiling. Then she sat up, crossed the room, and opened the bottom drawer of her dresser. Inside was a small, folded piece of paper yellowed at the edges. It was the list she had written long ago, back when she first moved north. Save enough to bring Mama to New York, get Caleb into college, work my way up anywhere, never sleep on a floor again. She stared at the list, her finger tracing each line. Then, for the first time, she wrote a fifth. Make sure no one else has to write a list like this. The storm came suddenly. It wasn't the kind that howled through windows or snapped tree branches, but a quieter, more calculated one made not of wind and rain, but headlines and digital noise. Maya sat in her office, a steaming mug of chamomile in hand, when Patricia burst through the door without knocking, breath short and eyes wide. You need to see this, she said, holding out her phone. On the screen was a headline, Billionaire's Redemption or Rebranding. Former Maid turned executive raises eyebrows. Below it, a photo of Maya at the gala navy dress. Quiet strength in her posture was cropped and lit in a way that made her look more like a manufactured icon than a person. Maya set her mug down slowly. Where did this come from? She asked. Gossip site, Patricia replied. But it's spreading. Social media's full of opinions right now. Richard appeared moments later, phone pressed to his ear. His face was tight. I'm handling it, he said into the phone, then ended the call. He looked at Maya. I didn't authorize that story. I don't know who leaked it. You think it was someone inside? She asked. He hesitated. Could have been a guest. Or an investor. Or someone who doesn't want to see the house change. Maya stood, arms crossed, calm but firm. The real question is, do we care what they say? Richard looked at her for a long moment. Do you? He asked. She considered that. Then, I care if the staff starts to believe it. If they think this is a show, a PR stunt. If they think I'm a puppet. You're not, Richard said. I know that, she replied. But they need to know it too. Oh. By that afternoon, a second article had surfaced, this one from a business journal. Langston Estates' new compassion initiative, disruption or distraction. It cited anonymous sources, claimed that Maya's new programs were costly, idealistic, and unproven. One quote read, "This level of access for a former domestic worker raises questions about boundaries and protocol." Angela slammed a spoon onto the kitchen counter when she read that line. You know what raises questions? She muttered. Decades of no one asking anything at all. That evening, Maya called an emergency all-staff meeting. The ballroom, normally reserved for glittering events, now hosted housekeepers, groundskeepers, drivers, and cooks, many still in uniform, many clutching mugs of coffee, unsure of what to expect. Maya stood on the stage alone. No microphone, no teleprompter. Just her. I know you've seen the stories, she began. Some of you have probably heard worse behind your backs for years. Murmurs rippled through the room. They say I don't belong here. That I was promoted because I nearly died. That this, she gestured around her, is some kind of corporate guilt experiment. She let the silence stretch. I won't tell you not to be angry. I won't tell you not to question me. But I will tell you this. I earned this place. Not because of sympathy, but because I knew what it was like to be on the floor. Unseen, unheard, and still show up every day. Heads began to nod. Patricia wiped her eye. You've given this house your lives, and you deserve to be more than background noise. You deserve safety, dignity, fair pay, real breaks. A voice. She took a breath. If they want to write headlines, let them. We'll write policy. Applause broke out, not polite, not pitiful, but full-throated, defiant, grateful. From the staff who had watched too many people come and go without ever making a dent, Richard watched from the back of the room, his arms folded. Not directing, just witnessing. After the meeting, Martin approached Maya, pulling something from his pocket, a folded newspaper clipping. 1,992, he said. They wrote an article about the estate staff back then. Called us the loyal help. Never once named us. Just said we were devoted. Like we were pets. He handed her the clipping. I've been waiting 30 years for someone to say what you just said. Maya folded the paper carefully. Thank you. That night, she received an email from a staff manager in Chicago, another Langston property. Saw what you said. We're in. When can we start? Maya replied. Tomorrow. We've already lost enough time. As she shut her laptop and looked out into the garden beyond her window, she didn't feel rattled. Not anymore. She felt ready. Let the world question her. She knew who she was. She had built that truth brick by brick, and it didn't shake when the wind blew. The following day dawned bright and cold. The frost clung stubbornly to the window panes as Maya walked briskly across the courtyard toward the main house. Her scarf whipped in the wind, her boots crunching against gravel. But her mind wasn't on the cold. It was on Chicago. She had spent most of the night coordinating with staff leads at the Langston estate in Lincoln Park. 2 workers had reached out anonymously about retaliation after voicing concerns about unpaid overtime. A kitchen assistant had been told she was lucky to even be employed. And a live-in janitor, Raphael, reported being threatened with eviction from staff housing after he asked for a raise. It was the kind of rot that grew in corners, quiet, slow, easy to ignore unless someone insisted on seeing it. Maya insisted. She entered the house and headed straight to her office. Richard was already there. sleeves rolled, eyes scanning a legal document with a furrowed brow. "I'm going to Chicago," Maya said without preamble. He looked up. "When?" "This weekend. I want to speak with the staff in person. I want to meet Raphael. Hear his story myself." "Under that?" Richard nodded. "Want company?" "No," she said. "This one's mine." A pause, then softer. "But I wouldn't mind your plane." He grinned. "It's gassed and ready." Etienne. By Friday morning, Maya was stepping out of a black car onto a quiet side street in Chicago's North Side. The Lincoln Park estate was smaller than New York's, more modest in footprint, but still surrounded by gates too high for neighbors to see over. She rang the intercom and waited. The gate buzzed open. A middle-aged housekeeper named Clara greeted her with red-rimmed eyes and a tightly pinned bun. "We didn't think you'd really come," Clara said. "I said I would," Maya replied gently. Inside, she was ushered into a small den where 5 staff members waited: Clara, Raphael, 2 young groundskeepers, and a woman named Denise who looked exhausted down to her bones. They sat in a semicircle while Maya listened. She didn't take notes. She didn't interrupt. She let the silence hang after every confession, let people feel the weight of their own words. Denise was the first to cry. "I gave them 10 years, she said, voice cracking. "No benefits, no appreciation, and when I got sick last fall, they replaced me in 2 days. Raphael spoke next. "They told me I was a liability, that asking for a raise made me combative. My wife's 6 months pregnant. I wasn't combative. I was desperate." Maya folded her hands in her lap. "I hear you," she said simply, "and I won't pretend to fix it all overnight, but I'm not leaving until the first steps are in place." She stayed for 3 days. She met with each staff member one-on-one, reviewed payroll, called the regional HR office, and threatened formal audits. By the time she boarded the plane back to New York, the Chicago staff had a new complaint procedure, retroactive pay reviews, and Maya's personal contact card in every pocket. On the flight home, Richard called. "How bad was it?" "Worse than I expected," Maya said. "But not unfixable." "You think this can scale?" he asked. She leaned back in the seat and looked out at the clouds. "It has to." "That. I am sad." Back at the Langston estate, the staff greeted her return with shy smiles and questions about the trip. Angela left a note taped to her office door. "Welcome back, boss lady. We missed the heart." That evening, Maya sat by the fireplace in her room, a soft blanket wrapped around her legs, sipping tea as she looked over her now thick project binder. Chicago was just the beginning. She'd already received requests for visits to Atlanta, Austin, even San Diego. This was no longer about her journey. It was becoming a movement. Later, she walked out to the back terrace and stood in the chill, watching the stars flicker overhead. Somewhere deep in the house, she could hear Patricia playing soft jazz from the radio. The warmth of the staff inside the walls reminded her that this estate, once hollow, now beat with a pulse she helped restore. Behind her, the sliding door opened. Richard stepped out, holding 2 mugs. "You looked like you needed this," he said, handing her one. "Chamomile?" she asked, surprised. "I've been paying attention." They stood in silence for a moment, sipping side by side. He spoke first. "You know, when I first hired you, I thought of you as part of the background, a function, a convenience." Maya didn't respond. She just let him speak. "But watching you now, I realize you were the foundation. Everything stable, everything decent, everything human in this house was because of you." She looked at him, eyes calm but clear. "And now it's my job to make sure I'm never that blind again," he added. Maya nodded. "That's a good start." They stood there in the cold, quiet air, 2 people changed by a storm of their own making, and by the courage of someone who refused to stay silent. Spring arrived like a whisper one day, a single crocus blooming on the lawn. The next, daffodils lining the walkway like little suns. The estate had always kept a well-manicured face to the public, but now, even the beauty felt more honest. There was life behind the windows, laughter, music. Maya stood at the staff wing's entrance, clipboard in hand, as a line of new hires stepped into the hallway. 6 in total. A mix of ages, backgrounds, and accents. They had just completed the first official Langston onboarding and welfare orientation. a program Maya had created herself, rooted in transparency, rights, and support. She handed each of them a soft-bound packet titled, "Your dignity is not optional." As they moved past her one by one, several murmured thanks. One young woman, no more than 22, with dark curls tucked into a neat bun, paused and looked Maya in the eye. "I read about you," she said. "Didn't think people like you actually existed." Maya smiled. "People like me didn't used to make it to this hallway, but we're here now." Later that day, in the main study, Richard stared at a framed photo of his father on the bookshelf. The elder Langston had been cold, proud, and precise, a man who valued legacy more than honesty. Richard had spent most of his life following in those footsteps, measuring worth by net profit and names on marble plaques. But now, he saw something else entirely. On his desk lay Maya's latest proposal, a formal Langston Foundation to support domestic workers across the country. Not just Langston employees, everyone. Grants, legal aid, training programs, and the name she had suggested? The Thompson Initiative. He chuckled to himself. The Maya he'd first met would have declined that honor. But this Maya had learned something powerful. Sometimes, putting your name on something wasn't vanity, it was a promise. He called her into the study. "I've reviewed the proposal," he said, standing behind his desk. "And it's bold." "Too bold?" she asked, calm. "No," he said. "Just enough." She crossed her arms lightly. "There's going to be pushback. There already is, but there's also interest. I've had 3 donors reach out after the Chicago changes went public. They want in." Maya raised an eyebrow. "In on doing good? Or in on being seen doing good?" Richard gave a tired smile. "That's your call. You'll chair the foundation." Maya blinked. "I'll what?" "You heard me. I'm stepping back. This can't be built by the old way of thinking. It needs new bones." She sat down, stunned. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." He walked around the desk and handed her a signed authorization letter. "You taught me how to be human again, Maya. The least I can do is get out of the way." That night, Angela hosted a small dinner in the staff lounge. No speeches, no ceremony. Just music and potluck dishes. Baked mac and cheese, slow-roasted chicken, sweet cornbread, rice and beans, and a carrot cake so good it made even Martin close his eyes mid-bite. Maya sat at the table, listening to the low hum of conversation. These weren't just workers anymore, they were family. Patricia clinked her glass with a spoon. To Maya, everyone quieted. To the woman who took her pain and made a policy out of it. To the woman who slept on bleach-scented tile and came back to build couches for the next girl. Maya swallowed hard, her throat tight. Angela added softly, "To the one who made us visible." The room erupted in cheers and hugs. Someone started a Motown record. A few began to dance. And for the first time in a long time, Maya let herself be fully still. No clipboard, no notes, just breath. That night, in her room, she stared at her reflection in the mirror, not searching for flaws or shadows, but simply acknowledging the woman she had become. Strong, soft, steady. She opened her nightstand drawer and took out the old name badge once more. This time, she didn't cry. She smiled. Then she placed it in a wooden box beside a fresh folder titled Phase 2, National Outreach. As she turned off the light and climbed into bed, a thought lingered. She had changed this house. Now it was time to change the country. 3 weeks later, Maya stepped onto the stage of a modest auditorium in Atlanta. The walls were old, lined with faded portraits and the faint scent of chalk and history. The room was packed, some in work uniforms, others in business attire. Community organizers, domestic workers, nannies, janitors, caterers, groundskeepers. People who kept the world moving, but were rarely in the spotlight. The microphone squeaked once, then settled. She didn't look down at notes. She didn't need to. "My name is Maya Thompson," she began, her voice steady. "I came here today, not as a figurehead, not as a guest speaker, but as one of you." A ripple of recognition passed through the room. "I know what it means to miss a bus and lose a paycheck. I know what it means to be called girl when you're 35. I know what it means to clean up a broken plate while someone else pretends they didn't see it happen. Heads nodded, eyes filled. I once thought surviving quietly was the only option. But silence isn't safety, it's suffocation. She stepped away from the podium, walking slowly across the stage. We deserve more than survival. We deserve dignity. Healthcare. Breaks without punishment. A future not built on our exhaustion. Applause grew, starting small, then sweeping the room like a rising tide. That afternoon, the Langston Foundation, now under Maya's leadership, launched its first regional worker support chapter. Free legal aid, therapy referrals, financial planning workshops, a 24-hour support line run by former domestic workers. The walls of injustice didn't fall in a day, but they cracked. That evening, back at her hotel, Maya sat on the edge of the bed, exhausted in the best way. She dialed Richard, who had stayed behind in New York. "We're official," she said, her voice tired but glowing. "I saw the photos already," he replied. "You looked like a force." She laughed, more like a well-dressed whirlwind. "I'll take it." They paused, the silence between them familiar and warm. "How are things there?" she asked. "Quieter. Less paper flying around. I think I might be learning how to breathe." Maya smiled. "Told you compassion had oxygen." The next day, Maya visited the home of Dolores Jenkins, a retired maid who had spent 50 years working in private homes around the South. Maya had read about her in a local newspaper, how Dolores had once walked 12 miles to work during a bus strike, just to avoid being fired. Dolores greeted her on the porch with a cane in one hand and a teacup in the other. "You the one raising all that good trouble?" she asked with a smirk. "I try," Maya said, shaking her hand. They sat in creaky wicker chairs as the sun stretched across the yard. Dolores told stories, some funny, some heartbreaking, of rooms she wasn't allowed to sit in, of children she raised who forgot her name, of employers who smiled in public but never learned to say, "Thank you. I never thought I'd see this day," Dolores said quietly. "Where someone like you walks in not to clean, but to change things." Maya reached out and took the elder woman's hand. "You open the door." "I'm just walking through it," Dolores nodded, eyes moist. "Then kick it wide open, baby. Kick it open for the ones still behind. Work still." Back in New York, the media firestorm had cooled. Public opinion had shifted. A recent profile in The Atlantic had dubbed Maya the quiet architect of justice. Maya read it once, then folded it away. She didn't need to read headlines to know what mattered. At night, the house felt different. The walls held voices now. Laughter echoed instead of silence. There were weekly game nights in the lounge, monthly potlucks. Angela had started a book club. Even Richard had been caught sneaking into the kitchen for midnight cake. In the staff kitchen one evening, Patricia pulled Maya aside. "Did you hear?" she said. "Clara from Chicago is speaking at the National Workers' Forum next month." Maya beamed. "That's incredible. You started something, Maya." She nodded. "Now we keep it going." "Aye." As Maya walked the halls later, checking rooms, offering hellos, she stopped at the fountain in the back garden, the same one where she had once left her name badge. She stared into the still water. This was no longer a story of survival. It was a legacy in motion. And tomorrow, she'd take it to Boston, then Detroit, then the places where no one thought anyone was listening. Boston was colder than expected. The wind off the harbor cut through Maya's coat as she stepped out of the town car in front of the Marble Row estate, another Langston property, though one that bore little resemblance to the one she had once scrubbed floors in. This estate looked like it had been frozen in time. Towering columns, iron gates, stained glass windows from a century long gone. But inside those antique walls, the rot was all too modern. The Boston staff had been silent for years, too afraid, too tired, too invisible. Maya had come to change that. Inside the house, she was greeted by Ellis, the head butler, an older man with perfectly parted silver hair and a polite, reserved demeanor. He had worked on the estate for 34 years. "We've never had a regional visit," Ellis said softly as he led her through the grand hallway. "Certainly not from someone like you." "Someone like me?" Maya asked, glancing sideways. Ellis smiled faintly. "Someone who understands." "Oh." They entered the staff dining area, A dozen employees sat waiting, most seated rigidly, hands folded, eyes wary. Maya recognized the signs. Fear of consequence, of saying too much, of being punished later for being honest now. She didn't speak from the front of the room. She pulled out a chair and sat among them. "My name is Maya Thompson," she said, voice calm but firm. "You've probably heard things, read things. Maybe you think I'm here to fix everything." No one moved. "I'm not. I'm here to listen, and then fight for what you need. But I won't know how to fight if you don't speak." A pause, then a soft voice. "I haven't had a paid sick day in 9 years, said a housekeeper named Janine. "If I miss work, I don't eat." "I haven't seen my son's school play in 5 years, said a groundskeeper. "Every time I ask for time off, they cut my hours the next week." "They installed cameras in the break room," added another. "Said it was for safety, but we all know it's about control." Maya took it all in, then she stood. Not with anger but with clarity. "I want you to hear this. None of that is normal. None of that is acceptable. And none of that will stand." She spent the next 4 days on site, auditing contracts, rewriting break policies, and installing anonymous reporting channels. More importantly, she spent those days reminding every person in that house that their humanity didn't end where the staff wing began. On the 5th night, Ellis found her in the garden, coat pulled tight against the wind. "You remind me of my sister," he said. She was a nurse. Fierce, quietly relentless. Maya smiled. "That sounds like the best kind of troublemaker." He handed her a small box, wrapped in brown paper. Inside, a silver pocket watch, engraved, "For the one who changed the hour." "It belonged to the original head butler here," Ellis said. "It's passed down when change comes." Maya swallowed hard. "I'm not." "You are," he interrupted gently. "Not because you hold power, but because you returned it." Back in New York, Richard met her at the airport. "You look like you've aged 5 years, he joked, taking her bag. "Boston is heavier than it looks." He drove her home in silence for a while. Then, "You know they're talking about federal partnerships now. What you're building, it's getting noticed." "I'm not building alone," Maya said. "I'm just the spark." The flame's already spreading. At the estate, they walked through the halls together. The house buzzed with its usual low-hum staff laughing, pots clanging, music softly playing from the lounge radio. Near the staircase, Maya stopped. "Do you remember the morning you fired me?" she asked. Richard froze. "I do." "Good," she said, "because every single thing that's changed since that day, every smile in this hallway, every policy you've signed, none of it would have happened if I hadn't come back." "I know. You didn't save me, Richard," Maya said, turning to face him. "I saved myself. And then I saved the system." He nodded, ashamed but proud. "You've become more than this house." "No," she said. "I've just finally made the house become more like me." That night, Maya sat at her desk, phone in hand. A message had come through from a woman in Alabama. "I saw your speech online. I've been a housekeeper for 22 years. Never thought I mattered until you said we did. I'm starting a petition at my estate. Thank you." Maya replied with 3 words. "You're not alone." She turned off her phone, leaned back in her chair, and smiled. Because the walls were still falling, and behind them, people were waking up. The sun rose slowly over New York, casting long shadows across the Langston estate. It was a Sunday, the kind of slow morning where most of the city was still asleep. But Maya was already at her desk, reviewing documents for the next phase of the foundation's rollout. The mobile advocacy units traveling legal and support services for domestic workers in remote towns and rural estates. She had always believed justice shouldn't require a zip code. A soft knock came at her office door. Angela stepped in with a steaming mug of coffee. "You've been up since 5 again," she said, setting the cup down. "I can tell because your eyes are doing that little twitchy thing." Maya laughed. "You know me too well." "Damn right I do. I've seen you work through the flu, heartbreak, and a busted ankle. But I swear, if you don't take a break soon, I'll tie you to that lounge chair out back." Maya leaned back, rubbing her temple. "There's just so much still to do, Anj." Angela nodded, her tone softer now. And you've already done more than most people do in a lifetime. Maya paused, eyes drifting to the window. Outside, Caleb was tossing a football with one of the estate drivers. Her brother was taller now, more confident, his college sweatshirt draped loose over his lanky frame. You remember when he wouldn't talk to anyone? Maya asked. Now he's out here making touchdown dances. Angela grinned. He's thriving. That's the word, isn't it? Maya murmured. Not surviving. Thriving. Is not sophistications. Angela reached out and squeezed her shoulder. And it started with you. That afternoon, Richard gathered the senior estate team in the formal parlor, once a cold and off-limits space, now filled with soft furniture and warm light. Patricia, Angela, Martin, and several others sat around the coffee table. Maya entered last. Richard cleared his throat. I know this house was never meant to feel like home for most of you, he began. And I know I was part of that history. But thanks to Maya, we've rewritten more than policy here. We've rewritten the heart of this place. He turned to Maya. The city is awarding you with the Beacon of Equity recognition next month. And the foundation has been invited to partner on a statewide employment bill. You've crossed the line from influence into legacy. The room filled with soft applause. Maya blinked, caught off guard. Patricia stood. She doesn't like attention, but I'm gonna say this anyway. You made us believe that change wasn't just something we survived long enough to see, it was something we could build with our own hands. Angela raised her glass. To Maya. To Maya, the room echoed. And for once, Maya didn't shrink from the praise. That evening, Maya stepped out onto the back terrace, a light shawl over her shoulders. The sky streaked in purple and gold. Richard joined her a moment later, 2 mugs of tea in hand. You ever think about the first day we met? He asked. She smirked. You mean the day you yelled at me for being 7 minutes late and then fired me for not making your breakfast? He cringed. Yeah, that one. I think about it all the time, she said. Because everything after it proves people can change. They stood there in companionable silence, the city skyline faint in the distance. I'm selling the estate, Richard said suddenly. Maya turned. What? I'm moving out. I've bought a small brownstone in Harlem. I want to be closer to the communities we're helping. I don't want to be behind gates anymore. Maya's eyes softened. You're sure? I am. And, when I leave, I want you to take over the estate. Maya blinked, stunned. Me? Not as a maid. Not even as an executive. As the caretaker of its legacy. Turn it into something new. A training center. A sanctuary. Whatever you dream. Her throat tightened. Richard, you already changed its soul. Now change its purpose. I know. Later that night, alone in her room, Maya took out her old journal. She turned to the last page, where she'd written, make sure no one else has to write a list like this. Below it, she added a 6th line, build a world where justice doesn't need a witness to exist. She closed the book and looked toward the future, because it was no longer a question of if the world could change. It already had. One voice at a time, one floor at a time, one woman at a time. A year later, the Langston estate no longer looked like it once did. The wrought iron gates remained, but they no longer stood for exclusion. They were ceremonial now, always open. The house had been transformed into the Thompson Center for Domestic Justice, a nonprofit training and advocacy facility that welcomed hundreds of workers each month. There was a new sign at the entrance, carved in elegant script and mounted on the stone pillar. Here, every worker matters. Every story counts. Inside the house, the grand ballroom had been repurposed into a lecture hall, with warm lights and communal seating. The former dining room was now the worker rights library. Staff dormitories had been upgraded to guest housing for visiting speakers, lawyers, and social workers. The kitchen still hummed with life. Angela had stayed on as head culinary coordinator, and her Sunday pot roasts had become legendary. In the main office, Maya stood before a glass wall covered in pinned photos, smiling faces of workers from across the country, some holding certificates, others flanked by family members, a few simply posing with tired pride. Each photo represented someone who had once felt invisible. Her calendar was filled with meetings, lawmakers, union leaders, international coalitions. The Thompson Foundation now had partnerships in 6 states and was working on its first federal policy recommendation, but despite all the growth, Maya still spent each morning walking the halls, greeting staff by name, listening to stories, and leaving handwritten thank you notes on office desks. This wasn't about her. It never had been. That afternoon, Caleb arrived from college. Backpack slung over one shoulder, his tall frame familiar but more grown now. He met Maya in the garden where cherry blossoms had just begun to fall like soft reminders of the past. "You look tired," he said, teasing. "You look taller," she shot back. He pulled her into a hug, tight and long. "I saw the article in Time. They called you the architect of quiet revolutions." "I didn't choose the title," she smiled. "But you earned it," he said. They walked the garden path together. Caleb pointed to the fountain. "That's where you said you used to sleep?" "On the bench," Maya nodded. "I thought if I stayed outside, I wouldn't take up space." He stopped walking. "But now you've rebuilt the whole house." She looked around at the blooming trees, the open windows, the sounds of laughter floating from the courtyard. "No," she said softly. "We all did." Later that evening, a special event was held in the newly restored ballroom. It was called Stories from the Floor, an annual celebration of domestic workers across the country. The room was filled with people in every kind of outfit, aprons, uniforms, suits. Everyone was equal here. Maya sat beside Richard, who had returned as a guest, not as an owner. He had kept his word, moved to Harlem, started volunteering at a local shelter, and let the estate go without interference. His face carried a peace it never had before. "You nervous?" he asked. "Always," Maya said with a grin. She stepped up to the podium as applause echoed across the hall. "Tonight," she began, "we honor not just those who've risen, but those who held the line when the world didn't see them. The women who worked through sickness, the men who stayed behind after storms, the caregivers who rocked babies while missing their own children's birthdays." She paused. "I know what it's like to be forgotten. To be called girl or boy when you have a name, to clean up spills and get blamed for stains. But I also know what it means to rise not because someone pulled you up, but because you refused to stay down." The room was silent. Then a single clap. Then a wave. "And now," she continued, "we make sure no one else is left behind." Behind her, a screen lit up with a new map. Over 20 states now had active worker advocacy hubs. Thousands had received health care, legal aid, education, and the work was still just beginning. After her speech, Maya returned to her seat. Angela leaned over and whispered, "I told you that badge would be history one day." Maya chuckled. "It still sits in my drawer." "Good. Reminders matter." As the music swelled and the room danced, Maya stood quietly by the doorway, watching a young girl in uniform take the hand of her little brother and spin him across the floor. Laughter, full and unrestrained, echoed in every corner. And for the first time since she had first walked into this house tired, cold, and unseen, Maya felt the story come full circle. She hadn't just rewritten her own fate, she had rewritten the fate of thousands. And in doing so, she had built a world that no longer waited for justice to arrive. It made justice feel like home. This story teaches us that true change begins not with power, but with courage. Maya's journey reminds us that dignity is not a privilege, it is a right. No matter how invisible society may try to make someone feel, one voice, one act of compassion, and one refusal to stay silent can ripple into lasting justice. We are not bound by where we start, but by what we choose to stand for. And sometimes, the quietest people carry the loudest truths.